Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and Stranger Things Season 3 hits the poor folks of Hawkins, Indiana with a third round of bloody terror that only the 1980s knew how to deliver. And like the absorbent monster of this season, these episodes are a gooey amalgam of 80s references, an omelet of Easter eggs made of people. I'm gonna break down all the interesting details that were easy to overlook, not just all the vintage 80s stuff that's on every shelf, but like the really subtle production details that no one ever talks about. And spoiler warning in case you haven't seen the new season yet. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, titled Susie Do You Copy, takes place in June 1984, a lab in Russia with a similar interdimensional experiment going on as we saw in the Hawkins lab scientists doing in season 1. Two Soviet scientists turn keys simultaneously to begin the test, a nod to the opening scene of War Games, suggesting that this device is as potentially globally catastrophic as nuclear war, and perhaps serving the same kind of purpose to the rival superpowers. This scene introduces us to the scientist Alexei, as well as the super strong, almost inhuman assassin Grigory, who is clearly modeled on the Terminator. Schwarzenegger even gets a shout out later on this season.
It's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Then we jump a year later to Hawkins, where Elle is making out with Mike Wheeler in her bedroom. There are some cassette tapes visible, including Corey Hart's Boy in the Box, which is what they're listening to here, and Bryan Adams' Reckless. And you'll notice that Elle is still wearing that blue bracelet. She started wearing that last season after becoming Hopper's adopted daughter. Before her, he wore that bracelet after fashioning it from a hair tie of his daughter, the one who passed away. Meanwhile, Hopper watches an episode of Magnum P.I., the Tom Selleck detective show that Hopper clearly fancies himself after. Later this season, Carney will tell him,
On your life, Magnum!
Mike, Will, Lucas, and Max sneak into an early screening of George Romero's Day of the Dead. This movie's zombie outbreak reflects the Mind Flayer's infection upon the Hawkins residents. And Dawn of the Dead was set primarily in a shopping mall, just like this season's final act. They go through the back door of Scoops Ahoy, the ice cream shop where Steve Harrington and the newcomer Robin work, and their work uniform does look a bit like the same kind of sailor outfit worn by the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man of Ghostbusters. Nancy and Jonathan wake up late, and on the walls of Jonathan's rooms are posters for REM and The Evil Dead, with The Evil Dead being another shout out to influential 80s horror. Later you'll see the inky vein pattern on Billy's body. It's actually similar to the look of the Deadites of Evil Dead. And when Jonathan puts on his pants, he falls over, just like Marty McFly does in Back to the Future when putting on his pants. Dustin returns home from science camp, radioing his buds.
This is Gold Leader returning to base. Do you copy? Over.
This is of course a nod to the Gold Squadron of Star Wars.
Red Leader, this is Gold Leader. We're starting our attack run.
And then when they surprise him, he accidentally sprays Lucas with his hairspray. This is the exact Farrah Fawcett hairspray that Steve recommended he use last season. Dustin shows off his new inventions, including an electric hammer that he calls the Slammer, which is very similar to the device invented by Randall Peltzer in Gremlins. And of course, Dustin names his radio antenna Cerebro from the X-Men comics. That's the device Professor X uses to locate fellow mutants, which is essentially what Dustin does with his fellow super nerd, Susie. Dustin describes Susie repeatedly as Phoebe Cates, but hotter. Phoebe Cates was the actress from the famous Fast Times at Ridgemont High pool scene, and she later cameos as a standee at the video rental store in the final episode. At the pool, Billy struts past the Hawkins moms, including Karen Wheeler, who reads a new Joanna Lindley romance novel this season. Billy calls out to a kid to tell him to stop running and calls him lardass, a nod to the other major Stranger Things influencer, Stand By Me, which in that movie adapted Stephen King's other story, The Revenge of Lardass Hogan. Hopper seeks advice from Joyce at the general store, and on a nearby shelf is a jack-o'-lantern bucket, which we know from a flashback is something that Bob inquired about, signaling his lingering memory coming between her and Hopper in the earlier part of the season. Hopper jokes about killing Mike, saying,
I'm the chief of police, I could cover it up.
Now, Hopper was of course modeled partly on Chief Brody in Jaws, who spoke a similar line.
I can do anything, I'm the chief of police.
And later, Hopper, also drunk on wine, quotes this line exactly.
I can do anything I want. I'm the chief of police.
At the newspaper office, Nancy takes a message from Doris Driscoll about rats eating her fertilizer. Now, this is a nod to the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a huge influence on this season's story, which featured a protagonist by the name of Elizabeth Driscoll. And like the season, Invasion of the Body Snatchers features a town of people overtaken by a hive mind. Which brings us to Chapter 2, The Mall Rats, the title referencing the term for 80s kids who spent all their time in malls, and the literal rats swarming to the steel plant just to be turned into goo for the Mind Flayer, the main villain from season 2, still alive even more threat. You'll notice that the Mind Flayer uses a tendril that attaches to people's faces, just like how the face hugger from the Xenomorph attaches to hosts in the Alien franchise. A poster for John Carpenter's The Thing is spotted in the Wheeler's basement. The Thing was another huge influence on season 3, with the whole body horror of human and animal flesh melting into indistinguishable goo monsters. And speaking of that goo, when Nancy and Jonathan head off to investigate the rats, he says,
or the old lady is nuts and the story blows up in her face and Tom fires us.
Just a little foreshadowing of this story's literal explosive turns later on, whether it's rats or fireworks or Russian portal devices. Dustin adorably reconnects with his mother, Steve Harrington, at Scoops Ahoy. And in the background, you can see 2 elderly women swapping each other's ice creams, just like Max and Eleven do later this episode. Time travel confirmed. Dustin tells Steve about intercepting the Russian transmission, saying,
It means, Steve, we could be heroes.
he's kind of foreshadowing the final scene of the season in which Peter Gabriel's cover of Bowie's Heroes plays, which was calling back the time the track was sampled in season 1 with Will Byers' fake death. Later, when Erica abuses the sample policy, the cash register reads EO2, a nod to this being episode 2 of the season. Elle and Max hang out, and Max uses the Madrid brand of skateboard, popular 80s brand that Marty McFly used in Back to the Future. And in Max's bedroom, there's a poster for the 60s surf movie The Endless Summer and a board game Can't Stop on the shelf. Inside Mrs. Driscoll's house, there's a cat clock on the wall, which is exactly like one of the many clocks in Doc Brown's workshop in the opening shot of Back to the Future. Later, when her caged rat explodes into goo, it oozes to the ground and sloshes away, setting up the way the Mind Flayer causes this flesh to move, and it's actually similar to the movement of the alien amoeba creature of the Blob. Hopper meets with Mayor Larry Klein, played by Carrie Elwes of The Princess Bride. And if Hopper is Chief Brody from Jaws, Mayor Larry Klein is Mayor Larry Vaughn of Amity Island in Jaws, a spineless politician who knowingly endangers the town on the 4th of July for short-term political and economic gain. Joyce stands up Hopper's dinner date while researching electromagnetism with the boy's old science teacher, Mr. Clark. He listens to Weird Al's parody song, My Bologna, while working on his town miniature set, just like the one in the opening shot of Beetlejuice. Actually, if you look real closely, there is a tiny Beetlejuice grave that they snuck in there. Steve Harrington makes his one big contribution to Robin and Dustin's Russian decoding by recognizing the music from the Indiana Flyer horse, Daisy Bell, aka Bicycle Built for Two, which is the famous song that the HAL 9000 sings when he's shutting down in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Moving on to Chapter 3, The Case of the Missing Lifeguard, which opens with Max and Elle ogling over Karate Kid, Ralph Macchio, and Tiger Beat magazine. Later, you'll notice Lucas appears in an outfit seemingly inspired by the Karate Kid. Kid's got moves. Elle uses her powers to spy on the boys, which ends with Lucas ripping one. Which might remind you of the amazing Dustin Farted song in season 1.
Dustin Farted.
Okay, very well.
Dustin and Steve scope out the mall for evil Russians.
I don't know what an evil Russian looks like.
Tall, blonde, not smiling.
Dustin is referencing the Ivan Drago trope from the then upcoming Rocky IV, with Drago being another Soviet killer that Grigory was probably based on. Elle uses her powers to seek out the missing lifeguard, Heather, finding her in an ice tub, which then plunges Heather into this black depth region, similar to Jordan Peele's Sunken Place visuals in Get Out. The whole Stepfordy doubles of Billy, Heather, and later other townspeople, while their true souls are in the Mind Flayer's Sunken Place, is very Jordan Peelean, as is the moment flayed Billy and Heather attack Heather's parents, which evokes that shot of Elizabeth Moss in Us. And earlier in this scene, I like the little clue that reflects how everything isn't quite right with Billy. Notice his shirt, it's half tucked, from flayed Billy trying to come off as a nice kid, but also half untucked, as Billy would probably normally keep it. Also in this episode, Hopper first confronts Grigory, and in addition to Chief Brody, Hopper is also an adaptation of Indiana Jones. As past seasons silhouettes of him and his hat have shown, we get another really cool shadow shot here with the gun, similar to the many iconic Indy shadow shots. Now, a number of you are asking about Mike's interesting line to Will in this episode.
It's not my fault you don't like girls.
Now, I guess you could interpret this to draw some conclusions about Will Byers' sexuality, but I don't know, it doesn't really seem to be played that way, at least in the moment. It kind of seems more like to me that Will might just feel pressure for still feeling like a child while his friends are chasing girls. And he might just have different interests, or he's not at that point in his maturity yet. Because, as we see after this, Will goes off to destroy his old Castle Byers clubhouse, which is a critical growing point for the character, foreshadowing his departure from Hawkins with really no home for him to go back to. By doing this, he kind of reflects that old adage adage of time to put away childish things, which author C.S. Lewis later rephrased to add, including the fear of childishness. So hopefully we can look at this as Will growing up a little, but still his inner creativity living on. But in this season, Will's purpose from here forward is mostly just to sense the Mind Flayer's presence with his Will tingle on the back of his neck. And he tells Mike and Lucas,
He's back.
which is kind of like Stranger Things 3's version of Carol Ann's famous line in Poltergeist.
They're here.
And some have said that this shot of Elle and Max could be a nod to the Grady twins of The Shining, with maybe Georgie's yellow raincoat from It, maybe. Similarity isn't always homage, only when I say it is. Moving on to chapter 4, the sauna test. A nod to the kids' plan to trap flayed Billy in the sauna room at the pool, knowing that the Mind Flayer hates heat. And this test parallels the famous test in The Thing, in which MacReady tests everyone blood to see which is actually the gooey evil monster, which in that movie also hates heat. Elle and Max look at comic books, Wonder Woman 326 and Green Lantern 185, and Dustin makes the meta-observation that Steve has never actually won a fistfight, reminding us that he got his ass beat by Jonathan in season 1 and Billy in season 2, but he does finally in episode 5 of the season win a fight, but as in past seasons, that pretty boy face does get bloodied and bruised up. It's kind of my favorite Stranger Things tradition. Now, in addition to callbacks and pop culture references, Stranger Things is also really great with subtle visual details and camera movement. But watch closely the scene in which flayed Tom, the editor, fires Nancy and Jonathan. He roars at Nancy and he kicks his chair. The moment he does, the camera tilts askew and it stays at the same tilted angle on Tom and on Nancy and Jonathan for the rest of the scene. So, like Billy's half untucked shirt and Tom's bandage and sweat here, this is another visual detail reflecting the ain't rightness of the scene. Hopper knocks Mayor Klein's face askew, finally kicking into gear this season, simultaneously reusing little details that he must have gathered when we thought he was drunk, like the spotting of Grigory leaving Klein's office and Klein's cigar cutter. I also like how, as Hopper interrogates Klein, he initially grabs Klein's nameplate, a threat to show that he's not afraid to choke the truth out of him. Robin gets the mall's blueprints and they devise a plan to use the air ducts, which Erica later crawls through since she's small enough, a nod to the famous air duct scenes of Alien and Die Hard. Now, the others conduct the sauna test on flayed Billy, who smashes through the window glass at Max. In season 2, Dr. Montgomery said that the Duffers told him to research Jack Nicholson in The Shining for inspiration. And here now, Billy goes full Here's Johnny, dropping F-bombs just like Jack did at Wendy in the earlier scene.
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the in.
And speaking of Kubrick references, after Elle fends off flayed Billy, the episode ends with the Mind Flayer hive mind and the song We'll Meet Again. Most famous is the music that played over Kubrick's closing mushroom cloud montage in Dr. Strangelove. Next up, there's chapter 5, The Flayed. Hopper and Joyce find Alexei, whom Hopper calls Smirnov, a nod to Yakov Smirnov, the Soviet-born American comedian who was super popular in the 80s. Grigory later shoots him and calls him a traitor for embracing American culture. Similarly, the KGB weren't very big fans of Yakov Smirnov's defection and Soviet bashing. Alexei's look also resembles Matthew Rhys's character in The Americans on FX. His character was a Soviet sleeper cell spy disguising himself as American in the 80s, and like Alexei, he also came to love American culture. The convertible that they later steal as a vanity plate, Todd Father, with his douche Todd seeing himself as the Godfather. Dustin radios to the others from the subterranean Russian base.
The Red Army has infiltrated Hawkins.
As Dustin notes later, this is a Red Dawn scenario. That's the 80s film in which the Soviet Union invades the US and a group of kids in a western town fight back. Another 80s kids fight back movie, The Goonies, gets another Stranger Things reference when Dustin says,
Holy mother of God.
a nod to one of the final lines from The Goonies.
Holy Mary, Mother of God.
As this group walks that endless hall, Dustin suggested the green fluid they found could be promethium, which Robin cites as a nod to the Cyborg DC comics, in which promethium was the substance that Victor Stone's father used for his bionic and cybernetic components. The conspiracy theorist Murray Bauman returns from season 2. He helps them translate for Alexei. And the kids go to see Mrs. Driscoll in Hawkins Memorial Hospital, whose HMH logo looks exactly like the logo from Haddonfield Memorial Hospital from the Halloween movies. Flayed editor Tom shows up again, and note that, just like flayed Billy, his shirt is half tucked. Flayed Tom and also flayed Bruce, Jake Busey, get beaten and they melt into goo, fusing into a not yet final form version of the Mind Flayer, another reference to how the monster from The Thing used carcasses to fuse together into an unspeakably huge monster. Which brings us to chapter 6, E Pluribus Unum, its title referring to the United States motto, meaning out of many, one, used ironically here to reflect the Soviet subversion of the US city. Also, of course, the way the many flayed come together to make one giant monster in the final scene. So they defeat Mind Flayer Jr. and it seeps into the sewer, leaving behind pieces of broken bone at the grate. Joyce and Hopper learn from Alexei and Murray that the Russians were conducting similar interdimensional experiments that the Americans were in Hawkins, and are now using the facility under the STARCOURT Mall, for which the land was sold to them by Mayor Klein, to ship in equipment for the lab where the old gateway was. So if this tech is an analogy for the nuclear arms race between the US and the USSR in the 80s, this would kind of be like if a nuclear leak disaster happened in America and was covered up, and then later Russians snuck in to continue weapons research on that property, but it's on someone else's soil. Alexei uses a straw and fast food wrappers to demonstrate, which is a callback to Mr. Clark using the analogy of the flea and the acrobat to explain the upside down in season 1. Meanwhile, Erica finds a large cage in the facility. And
How big did you say that Demogorgon was?
Big. 9 feet or so. Why?
this sets up the big reveal in the season's post-credit scene, the return of the Demogorgon, or maybe a Demogorgon, with the Russians having one that they apparently feed prisoners to. Elle connects with Billy and learns about his past abuse that she later uses to get Billy to help her defeat the Mind Flayer monster in the final episode. But in this scene, Billy sits frozen on his bed with this intense stare, which could be another parallel between Billy and Jack Torrance from The Shining. And behind him on his bedroom wall, there's a poster for the Metallica album Kill 'Em All, definitely a reflection of the Mind Flayer's mindset that he reveals to Elle on her way back out of this connection. Hopper and Joyce call a number given to them by Dr. Sam Owens last season. That was Paul Reiser's government scientist. He actually shows up at the end of the season, presumably to keep a lid on everything. And Hopper gives the contact Murray's phone number, 616-625-8313. And if you actually call that number, you get an interesting away message recording.
And this is Joyce. Joyce, thank you for calling. I've been trying to reach you. I have an update. It's about, well, it's probably best if we speak in person. It's not good or bad, but it's something.
Perhaps this suggests that wherever Joyce took Will and Elle at the end of the season, the drama with the Mind Flayer or the Upside Down could have followed them, and that's why Joyce was reaching out for help. Or maybe Murray has information that Hopper could still be alive, since the Russians are keeping an unknown American in a holding cell that we saw in the post-credit scene. Now, the Russians holding Steve and Robin and interrogating them with truth serum find that Dustin and Erica have returned, burning holes through the levels with that green substance, similar to the Xenomorph's acidic blood burning holes through layer after layer in the Nostromo in Alien. Moving on to Chapter 7, The Bite, which opens at Mayor Klein's carnival. In a speech, he says,
"Who here wants to see some fireworks?"
This also foreshadows the final battle with the Mind Flayer, in which the kids use Satan's baby M80s on it. Holly Wheeler sees that the trees down below are moving, a nod to Spielberg's shot in Lost World Jurassic Park. Some other Jurassic Park shots show up when the kids are hiding from the monster in the mall behind counters similar to the kids in Jurassic Park in the kitchen. They gear up to fight the monster in the cabin, with the camera circling their huddle, just like the shot of Nancy and Jonathan bracing to fight the Demogorgon in the Byers home in season 1. Now, their battle here evokes Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, with Jonathan hacking away with an axe, just like we saw in the Evil Dead. And when a piece of the monster gets cut off, it crawls away, just like Ash's evil hand does. And I couldn't help but see a parallel with the movie The Cabin in the Woods, with one group of characters fighting for their lives in a cabin up on the surface, and another group of characters down below driving trams in a secret underground facility. Dustin and Erica hide Steve and Robin in the screening of Back to the Future, with Alan Silvestri's famous score humorously playing alongside the drama that these kids are going through.
Shit, not now. Please, not now. Mike!
And the radio going dead on Dustin here is played just like the time machine battery dying on Marty right at the most climactic moment.
No. Not this time. Come on.
They patch up Elle's wound in a grocery store where Lucas passes a bunch of old school cereal. There's like Pac-Man cereal, Mr. T cereal, Rainbow Bright, G.I. Joe Action Stars, and Ghostbusters cereal. And as Elle goes back under, beneath her beloved Eggo waffles, Lucas sips on some new Coke, comparing it to John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a better regarded remake from a 1951 film. And this is just a little ironic to us now, considering The Thing was remade again as a prequel in 2011, and it was pretty bad. Also playing at the cinema are the movies Daryl. It was about a super smart kid robot on the run from government scientists, kind of like 11 was in season 1. There's also Return to Oz, which is a live-action sequel to The Wizard of Oz about Dorothy returning after escaping electroshock treatment, the kind that Elle's mom underwent. There's also Cocoon, which is about the retirement home residents who become rejuvenated through an alien life force in a swimming pool. Fletch, that was a Chevy Chase comedy, and The Stuff, which is about a creamy, addictive food that was revealed to be a parasite controlling people's minds, kind of like the Mind Flayer is doing this season. Robin, Steve, Erica, and Dustin escape Russian guards by sliding down the space between escalator rails aliens, which is a shot lifted directly from Dawn of the Dead. Alexei has some fun at the carnival. He wins a dart throwing booth prize. And if you look closely among those prizes, among them are some stuffed gizmos from Gremlins. Hopper fights Grigory and the other Russian guards in the funhouse. This setting is really kind of a trope in a lot of movies. And they realize that Elle's bite from the mind flayer left a piece of it implanted in her leg. Ugh. Bringing us to the final episode, Chapter 8, The Battle of STARCOURT, in which they haphazardly extracted. It evokes the classic chestburster scene from Alien, with the little creature trying to scamper away after, but here, Hopper stomps it. So with everyone now reunited, they split up into groups again, with Dustin nicknaming Nancy's group Griswold Family, a nod to the National Lampoon's vacation movies. Hopper shoots the Russians downstairs.
What are you doing?
I'm improvising.
This is another shoot first, figure it out as you go kind of move that Hopper shares with the great Dr. Jones.
I'm going after that truck. Oh. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
And of course, disguising themselves as enemy soldiers is a different Harrison Ford character move, Han Solo, when they dressed up as stormtroopers in Star Wars. So to reach the key, they have to enter Planck's constant, which in quantum physics is the constant for electromagnetic action, relating the energy carried by a photon to its frequency. But they don't remember it perfectly, so Dustin has to call his actually existing girlfriend, Susie. She's reading the book A Wizard of Earthsea. That was the first of the fantasy Earthsea novel series. And she makes Dustin duet with her the never-ending story theme song for telling him the right number. So while Joyce struggles to turn both keys to turn off the device, Hopper has his final fist fight with Grigory by the machine's whirring blades, and eventually throws Grigory into the blades, chopping him up. This is exactly like Indiana Jones fighting the Nazi brute in the plane propeller blades in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And if you think about it, in a way, Grigory is done in by the machine that Alexei, the man he killed, helped build. So Joyce is able to shut off the machine, causing an explosion that evaporates a bunch of scientists, and Hopper appears to die in this blast, though we never see his body evaporate. Joyce covers her eyes, and briefly the platform that he was standing on appears empty, giving more evidence to his survival. Actually, check out my post-credit scene breakdown for more information on that. So 3 months later, a news report dismisses the events as a chemical leak, chalks it up to satanic rituals, which is a nod to the satanic panic trend of the 1980s. Unfortunately, a lot of kids who play D&D were thought to be devil worshippers. Steve and Robin apply for a job at the video rental store from Keith, that was the arcade employee from season 2, and Elle moves away with Joyce and Will. She reads Hopper's letter as Peter Gabriel's cover of Bowie's Heroes plays. Again, check out my post-credit scene breakdown for why the final words of Hopper's letter and this music could both be clues for Hopper's survival. So do you think Hopper is still alive? And where do you think Stranger Things 4th season could go? Comment down below with your thoughts and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Erik Voss, and subscribe to New Rockstars for breakdowns and theories on everything you love. Thanks for joining me, and oh my God, how'd I get chocolate on the back of my neck?